All right, here's our video today, analytic geometry, and we're going to talk about distance and midpoint. And distance is pretty obvious. It's how long a line segment is, and the midpoint is the middle of the line, right? So, and we should be careful. Let's make sure I have a pen ready first. So we should be careful. Some students make this mistake. So let's say I had a line segment, and pretend it's straight. And let's say at this line segment, it was at x was at 1 and y was at 0. So that's the point on the grid, on the x and y graph. And over here we had 10, 0. Now, some students may say that the middle is 5. Well, it's not. Well, how long is this? Well, this is 9 units. It's not 10 units. So you have to be careful on that. Remember, when you're starting at 1, you don't add the 1, right? The next 1 will be at 2. So remember, when you're born, you're not 1 years old when you're born. So look out for that one. All right. So let's get an example going over here. So, and maybe I'll stick with black, maybe. Or we'll go to this kind of plasma over here. Not that. All right, so a line segment there. And maybe try to draw it straight. And we'll make it like that. So we have this line segment on the x and y graph, or the Cartesian plane, or coordinate grid, whatever you want to call it. And so we have points. And let's say this was at 1, 0. Right? The x is at 1, the y is at 0, x, y. Right? And at this point over here, let's say it was at 11. The x is at 11, the y is at 6. And we want to know the midpoint. What's the middle? Where is the middle? And we'll put a red dot. Let's just pretend that's the middle. What would be the coordinates of the middle line? And there's a formula. It's a pretty simple formula. You're going to take one x. We say x subscript 1 because it's just one of the x's, whatever x you want to use. And then we need another x, and we're just dividing it by 2. That's it. So if we look at the x's we have 1 plus we have 11. Now we could have used 11 plus 1, right? Doesn't matter. And we divide it by 2, so this is going to be 12 divided by 2. And we know it's 6. So that on the graph, we know the middle, the x would be 6. But we don't know the y yet. So we'll do the same with the y. Same way. We're going to say y1 plus y2 over 2. Right? So we have a 0 plus we have a 6 for y. We know that's 6 over 2, so it's 3. So the coordinates, the midpoint of this line segment is 6, 3. That's how we did it. Let's do another one. All right, so now we have a line segment that's negative. It's on a graph on the x and y plane. So why don't you pause the tape and see what the midpoint would be? What do you think? All right, so we have an x. So -4 is an x. What do you think? As the planes fly over the school, making all kinds of noise. Again with the formula, right? So make sure what should we use? We'll use black still. So we have a -4 plus we have a 6 over 2, right? Here's our -4. There's our 6. And so we're going to have 2 over 2 and 1. 1 will be the midpoint. And there's 1 right there. So there's the midpoint. So that's for the x. And for the y, well, we have a 4, right? And we have a -5. So that's going to be -1/2. And you can see right there. That's right there. So the midpoint would be, and don't forget when you get the answer, put the x and the y. Don't just put x. So it'll be 1 -1/2. Or you could say 1 -0.5 if you want to use a decimal. Now let's look about the distance now. And when we're talking about distance, we're not talking about in physics like distance equals rate times time. No, we're looking how long something is. How many units. So let's look at this. Let's look at the same picture. I'll clear this out. And I'll write the formula for the distance formula in geometry. And the distance is going to be the square root, a fancy formula. And we're going to say we're going to take two x's, Doesn't matter which ones. We're going to minus it this time, then square it, then add it to the y's. And I'll give an example. All right, so again, we have our x's, right? We have a -4 and we have our 6. So let's do it over here. Put the square root, and we'll say 6 minus -4. Be careful on that, and then we'll square it. And then we're going to add it to the y's. So why don't we do -5 minus 4, and we'll square it. Then get the square root. Put a little arrow down here. The square root over here. So 6 minus -4 is 6 plus 4, right? Remember, keep, change. So that'll be 10 squared plus, and -5 minus 4 is -5 minus -4. Keep, change, remember. So that'll be -9 squared. And it doesn't matter if it's negative because it's going to become a positive number. So we have 100 plus 81. So it's going to be, the answer will be the square root of 181. And which is about 13.6, roughly around there. Let's do a few others. All right, so why don't you try to get the midpoint and the distance for this line segment? So pause the tape, see what you get. All right, let's get the midpoint first. So what did you get? What did you think? So we have our x's, we have our y's, we have our pen ready. Maybe we'll use blue. So, we have a 1 plus we have a 7 for the x's. So that's 8 over 2. So we know 4. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. At 4 on the x would be the midpoint. And so for the y's, we have a 3 plus we have a 6 over 2. So we have 9 over 2. So that'll be 4.5. So at 4, 4.5, that is the midpoint right there. Let's change the color so you can see it a little better. That's the midpoint. So again, you would say 4, 4.5, or 4 and 4.5, whatever one you want to use. But what's the distance now? What's the distance? So remember the formula for distance. So we're going to have, x1 or x2 minus x1, doesn't matter, squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Fix that square root. So what do we get? What did we get? Let's put it over here. Put a little arrow over there. So we have x is 1, and we have an x of 7, so we can say 1 minus 7 squared, right? And we can add that to 3 minus 6 squared. I'll put another arrow over there. So 1 minus 7 is -6. You don't care if it's a negative because you're going to get a positive. So -6 squared plus 3 minus 6 is -3 squared. Getting closer. So we're going to have the square root of 36 plus 9. And that'll give us 45. So we know the answer will be the square root of 45. Now, you could break down the square root of 45 down. You might recall. So the square root of 45 is the square root of 9 times the square root of 5, which would give us the square root of 9 is 3. So the answer will be 3 square root of 5. And you should know how to do that. And in case you don't, have some videos on that. All right, so that was distance and midpoint for analytic geometry. Oh, and by the way, analytic geometry is also called coordinate geometry because you're using the coordinate plane, or like a Cartesian plane made from René Descartes. All right.